Hey there, welcome to another episode of the Cutting Room Floor. This is a segment that allows us to go a little bit into some more detail, or maybe to follow a rabbit trail from a recent message here at Sunny Slope and explore something that maybe isn't the primary focus of a message or a text, but is maybe something of interest and kind of deepens our learning and our understanding of what the Bible teaches. In Mark chapter 14, verse 58, Jesus is accused of making the claim that he was going to destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days. Now, when we looked at that on Sunday, we acknowledged that that accusation was actually a distortion of a couple of things that Jesus had said. It seems that his accusers were conflating two different sayings or two different things that Jesus had said over the course of his ministry. Now, what I actually want to focus on is a little bit related to that. It's what he says when he talks about destroying the temple. What I find interesting about that is that in already back in Mark chapter 3, verse 6, Jesus has just performed a miracle, a healing of a man. And when his enemies see that, they begin to plot together. And what Mark says, at least in our English translation, Mark says that his enemies were plotting to destroy Jesus. And so it's sort of interesting then, and I think what Mark is doing is he's picking up that idea later on in the gospel, and he's showing that his enemies have succeeded in destroying Jesus, or at least it appears they've succeeded in destroying Jesus. In other words, when Jesus is finally put on trial and he's about to be crucified, the accusation brought against him is that you're going to destroy the temple, when the irony in that statement is that all along it's been his enemies, it's been the Pharisees, it's been the elders, it's been the teachers of the law who have been plotting themselves to destroy the temple. So the accusers are pointing the finger at Jesus and they're saying, you're threatening to destroy this temple. But what they don't realize is that they themselves, the accusers, have in fact been the ones working to destroy Jesus. And in destroying Jesus, they are, without realizing it, they are the ones who are destroying the temple. Now, I have to add a little caveat to that, because the textual link here isn't as strong as I wish it was. Now, what I mean by that is just simply that I think this is a pretty remarkable idea. The Greek text doesn't give it as much support, so that I can't really 100% with 100% confidence say that that's exactly what Mark had in mind. So I'll just give you a little technical detail, a little technical information. There are two Greek words that can be used that can be translated into English, that would be translated as to our English word for destroy. There's the word apollomi, and there's the word kataluso. And either of those words could be used and would accurately be translated as destroy. In Mark chapter 3, the word apollomi is used. And in Mark chapter 14, verse 58, the word kataluso is used. And so the Greek word is different in both of those occasions. And that should lead us to be a little bit careful about drawing connections that are too tightly bound up together there, because Mark is using different language. It is worth noting that in Matthew's account of the same story, in Matthew's account of the accusations being brought against Jesus, he uses the word apollomi. And so Matthew is consistent there. And so there is some support for this idea for making this connection. But here's where we are on pretty solid ground. When we ask the question, what really did Jesus mean by this? What was his point? Jesus' point was that he had come to establish a new meeting space for people with God. He had come to create a new means by which people could encounter and experience the presence of God in their own life. So previously, if you wanted to experience the presence of God, you'd have to go to the temple. And that's where the presence of God was most accurately and most, you might say, most clearly sensed, or maybe sensed isn't the best word of it. It's not so much of an emotion, but it's the temple is the place where the presence of God was most, you might say, most concentrated. It was most clearly manifest or made known. And so if you wanted to experience God's presence, you'd have to go to the temple and you'd have to bring a sacrifice, and the priest would have to offer a sacrifice on your behalf, and the priest would act on your behalf and enter into the presence of God for you. What Jesus is saying is that he had come to really to do away with all of that. He'd come to make a new way in which people would encounter the presence of God by claiming himself and by affirming that he was the temple. And by saying that if you Pharisees, if you destroy this temple, I will raise up a new temple in 3 days. What he's really doing is he's talking about his death and resurrection. He is really making the claim that from the point of the resurrection going forward, he would be the means by which people could encounter the presence of God. So no more would a person be required to bring sacrifices and purification and offerings and so on and so forth. But the temple would now be greater than a structure, be greater than a building. He would be the one, and he would be the one in whom a person could encounter and experience the presence of God. And this is of course consistent when Mark records the death of Jesus. He tells us that the curtain in the temple was torn from top to bottom, as if God himself were tearing the curtain open. You might say from the inside, and then his presence goes outward from there. There's sort of that idea as well. Here's where I think a passage like this is quite challenging. What Jesus is really claiming is that there are not multiple ways and many different ways and many different options by which a person might encounter the presence of God. Jesus is claiming that he, and the early church, of course, backed this up, and the church was consistent in this message, but Jesus is claiming that he and he alone would be the means by which a person would encounter and experience the presence of God. Now, this is one of these ideas that today doesn't find a lot of enthusiasm in our culture today. Our American culture and Western culture is very much about acceptance and tolerance of everyone finding their own pathway to God. And so to claim, it's one thing to claim that Jesus is a way to God. Most people would affirm you in that. If you make that claim, they would say, hey, great. If Jesus works for you, then fantastic. But where people have trouble is when you make the claim that Jesus is the only way, and if you want to get to God, you must go through Jesus. That's a claim that not a lot of people get real excited about, and certainly in broader culture, that claim causes a lot of difficulty. I want to try to make the case just briefly that this is in fact this is not bad news the way that it's often portrayed, but it's actually good news. And one of the reasons I think is this. It takes all of the burden and all of the pressure off of the individual. See, most other religions and most other ways of getting up to God are all about what do we do? It's about finding your own path, and it's about charting your own course. And depending on which world religion you follow, it's about following a certain set of rules or abiding by a certain set of principles. It's about following the sevenfold path. It's about adhering to the 5 pillars of Islam. It's about trying to be a morally good person. And if you're good enough, and if you try to, live by the golden rule or follow the 10 commandments or do whatever else that you judge needs to be done, then if you do that well enough, then you will climb up the ladder and get to God. The problem with this is that it becomes a never-ending burden. It's all about the effort that you are putting in, and and you're left wondering all the time, am I really doing enough? Am I trying hard enough? Am I being consistent enough? Am I working hard enough? And you'll notice that people who live by that worldview, whether it's following one of the major world religions or whether it's just sort of charting your own course of being a good person, there's always a sense of anxiety about it. There's always a sense, sort of a low-level sense of anxiousness about whether or not you're really doing enough. Or there's often a sense of pride and condescension about it. There's often a sense of, I am better than you because I'm doing these things better than you are. And Christianity is different. And what Jesus is claiming here is actually quite different. He's saying it's not up to you to climb up to God. it's God who's come down to you. It's not about you climbing some kind of ladder up to the divine. It's actually recognizing that you are helpless and you have nothing to bring to the table and you are unable and incapable on your own of getting anywhere. But Jesus comes down to us and he makes a way for us to enter into the presence of God. He makes a way for us to have access to the favor and the blessing and the goodness and the kindness and the mercy of God that is demonstrated to us in Jesus. Right. So the cross and the ministry and the person and the work of Jesus is all about creating a new temple, a new means by which we might access the presence of God. And it's a way that takes the burden off of us. It's a way that takes all the pressure and the anxiety out of it, because it's no longer about what are you doing and how hard are you trying, but it's about, are you trusting in what God has done for you? Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, leave a comment, and we'll see you next time on the cutting room floor.